The mansion was quiet, almost too quiet. The faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed louder than usual, echoing in the empty spaces where laughter once lived. The billionaire, Richard, sat slouched on the leather sofa, staring blankly at the expensive marble floors that reflected the dim light from the chandelier above. His eyes were red from crying, and his hands trembled as he held his infant daughter Emma close to his chest. Just 2 days ago, his wife had passed unexpectedly. The cause didn't matter now. The pain of losing her, of losing the woman he had promised to spend his life with, was unbearable. Emma was hungry, crying softly in his arms, and he had no idea what to do. For the first time in his life, Richard felt helpless. All the wealth, the cars, the private jets, it meant nothing here. Nothing could bring her back. Nothing could stop the emptiness from spreading in his chest. He tried feeding Emma from a bottle, fumbling with the formula, spilling some on the white silk rug. She cried louder, and he felt guilt burning through him. How could he be a father when he couldn't even keep his own life together? Richard buried his face into her tiny shoulder, wishing the world would pause so he could figure out how to survive this loss. "Daddy? Hungry?" Emma whimpered, her little hands reaching for him. He rocked her gently, whispering words he wasn't sure he believed. "I know, sweet girl. I know, Daddy's here. I'll take care of you." But he hadn't taken care of anything in days. The mansion was cold. The kitchen's empty because he hadn't bothered to cook, and the staff, well, the staff had quietly retreated, unsure how to handle the chaos of grief mixed with such immense wealth. Most employees didn't understand what it meant to see a man like Richard cry like a child rocking his baby in his arms. Then the soft sound of footsteps approached from the hallway. He looked up, startled, and saw her. Mariah, the family's black maid. She was a quiet woman, never one to draw attention, but her presence always brought calm. Today she carried a tray with warm milk, some blankets, and a small wrapped package of baby food. Her eyes softened as she saw Richard struggling with Emma. "Sir, may I help?" she asked gently, setting the tray down on the side table. Richard swallowed hard. Pride, stubbornness, and sheer embarrassment battled in his chest. I can manage," he whispered, his voice cracking. Mariah stepped closer, unafraid of the tension. "No, sir. You can't. Not today." Her calm tone, her firm yet kind presence, pierced through his grief like a lifeline. She took the bottle from his trembling hands and prepared it with practiced ease. She cooed at Emma softly, and for the first time in hours, the baby quieted, eyes wide and curious, as if sensing that this woman could bring warmth into a house filled with shadows. Richard watched, helpless and amazed. Mariah wasn't just a maid. She was a force of nature in this quiet storm. She carried herself with a dignity that made the vast wealth surrounding them seem irrelevant. And in that moment, he realized how little he had truly seen her before, not just as an employee, but as a human capable of strength, bravery, and compassion. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely, unable to meet her eyes. Mariah only smiled gently, placing the bottle into Emma's tiny mouth. She spoke softly. "It's all right, sir. We'll get through this together." As Emma drank, Richard felt something stir inside him, a flicker of hope he hadn't felt since the accident. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely alone. And perhaps the family he thought was falling apart could find a way to hold together again. But even as he watched, the thought of his late wife still pressed heavily on him. He couldn't help but remember the arguments, the coldness, the tension that had crept into their home before she died. And then the question gnawed at him. Could he truly rebuild what was broken? Or was this mansion, this life, nothing more than a gilded cage now? Mariah, noticing the distant look in his eyes, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sir, you have a choice. You can stay broken, or you can try to fix what's left. Emma needs you. I know she needs you more than you know." Her words, simple and unassuming, cut through the darkness like sunlight through storm clouds. Richard held Emma tighter, swallowing hard, realizing that this woman, this quiet maid, might be the only one capable of saving his family from falling apart completely. And just as he began to consider what that might mean, he saw it, a small, unassuming act of defiance from Mariah. She did something he never expected, something that could change everything. But he had no idea how far her courage would go or the storm it would bring with it. Richard sat frozen, staring at Mariah as she carefully handed Emma back to him. There was a quiet authority in the way she moved, a sense of confidence that seemed impossible for someone so unassuming. He had known her for years, seen her every day, yet he had never truly looked at her, never truly understood the strength she carried, silently behind her soft voice and composed demeanor. Today, that strength was palpable, tangible, and it demanded recognition. "Sir," Mariah said softly, "I need you to listen." Richard blinked, confused. He had spent days just existing, surviving on nothing but grief and exhaustion. Listening had felt impossible. But something in her voice, something that commanded his attention, made him focus. "You're sitting here, crying, holding your daughter like she's the only thing keeping you alive," she continued. "And that's okay. But your wife, your late wife, she left something behind. Not just Emma, not just her memory. She left you. And she left the choice to make this home, this family, whole again." He swallowed hard. He hated that she was right. The truth stung, sharper than any luxury, any money he had spent, trying to fill the emptiness. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Everything's gone wrong. I can't even feed her properly. I can't fix anything." Mariah shook her head almost gently, almost as if scolding a child. "No, sir, you can. But only if you stop hiding. Stop pretending you're alone. You have help if you let it. And right now, your baby needs more than your tears. She needs your strength. She needs a father who can be more than just a man in grief." Richard felt a strange mix of shame and relief. Shame because he had let everything collapse. Relief because someone who worked quietly in the background was offering him a lifeline. For the next hour, Mariah guided him through feeding Emma, soothing her cries, and even cleaning the kitchen while he watched, exhausted. She worked with such patience, such determination, that it almost felt as if she could carry the weight of the entire mansion on her shoulders. And maybe, in some ways, she was already doing that. When Emma finally fell asleep, Richard sank into the sofa, his body shaking with relief and sorrow. Mariah sat across from him, folding laundry in silence. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable, it was healing. After a while, Richard found himself speaking. "Mariah, I don't even know where to start. I failed her. I failed my wife. I don't know how to do this." Mariah looked up, her eyes meeting his. They were calm, but unwavering. "You start by admitting that you need help. You start by being honest about your pain. And you start by letting someone who cares guide you. You're not alone in this, sir." "Not anymore." He nodded, swallowing hard. The lump in his throat wouldn't go away, but for the first time, it felt like maybe he didn't have to face it alone. Then Mariah did something unexpected. She put down the laundry, stood, and walked toward him. "There's something else, sir," she said. Her voice was low, serious. "Something I've been holding back because I wasn't sure how you'd react. But I can't stay silent anymore." Richard's brow furrowed. What is it?" Mariah took a deep breath. "Your wife. She wasn't just cold toward you sometimes. She was cruel. And it was getting worse. She was pushing Emma away, pushing you away, and I couldn't watch it happen anymore. Not to her. Not to this family." Richard's stomach twisted. He wanted to deny it, to shield himself from another layer of grief. But deep down, he knew she was telling the truth. The house had been tense, full of sharp words and silent battles, and he had buried his head in his work and money to avoid seeing it. "What did you?" he asked cautiously, afraid to hear her next words. "I did what I had to do," Mariah said firmly. "To protect this family. I confronted her. I made her understand that her behavior could destroy everything, that she could destroy this child's life before it even began." Richard's eyes widened. You confronted her?" Mariah nodded. Yes, I may have slapped her." Richard froze. The room seemed to get colder, heavier. The word slap echoed in his head. But then he looked at Emma, asleep peacefully in her crib, and something shifted. "You did what? What needed to be done?" he asked quietly. Mariah's expression didn't waver. "I did. Because if I didn't, this family, this child, would have been in danger. And I can't stand by while that happens. Not when I've seen what you're capable of, Richard. Not when I know this family can be whole again." He felt a strange mix of awe, gratitude, and guilt. Awe because of her courage, gratitude because of her loyalty, guilt because he had never noticed, never acknowledged, never appreciated her. And then he realized something. This wasn't just about a slap. It wasn't just about confrontation. It was about truth. About standing up for what mattered when everyone else was too weak or too scared to act. I don't know what to say, he admitted. You don't have to say anything, she replied softly. Just let your actions speak. Be the father Emma deserves. Be the man this family can respect and love again. And let me help you. I'm here. I've always been here. The room was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, Richard nodded. All right, he whispered. I'll try. I promise I'll try. Mariah smiled faintly, almost relieved. She had done what she could. Now the next steps depended on him. Over the next few days, Richard began to act differently. He cooked meals, simple ones at first, but he cooked them. He fed Emma with confidence, learning her cues, understanding her needs. He spoke to her, sang softly, and even laughed at her little giggles. Mariah guided him through it, silently teaching him how to navigate the emotional and practical challenges of fatherhood. But life was never going to be easy. Old wounds, unresolved tensions, and the shadow of his late wife's cruelty lingered in the hallways. One afternoon, Richard found himself face to face with a legal complication. A letter from a family lawyer stating that his wife's estate had certain stipulations, and that Emma's care could be challenged if he didn't comply. Panic rose in his chest. He had barely stabilized his own emotions. Now he had a legal threat looming. Mariah saw the letter before he could hide it. Sir, you're letting fear control you, she said. I don't know what to do, Richard admitted. I can't fight this. I can't even keep the house together, and now there's this. Mariah placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Then let me fight. Not for money, not for power, but for what's right. For Emma. For this family. You've cried enough. It's time to act. Richard looked at her, stunned. He realized she wasn't just a maid. She was a warrior. A protector. A voice of reason when his world had gone mad. And he knew deep down that she would not fail. Not because she was fearless, but because she cared in ways most people never did. Over the next few days, Mariah began researching legal procedures, gathering evidence and quietly organizing support. She worked late into the night while Richard finally slept. Exhausted but at peace, knowing someone he trusted had his back. Then came the day that would change everything. The family lawyer arrived, looking stern and imposing, expecting to intimidate Richard. But when he saw Mariah, the lawyer's confident demeanor faltered. She spoke clearly, firmly, presenting every document, every piece of evidence, every moral argument that proved Richard's capability and right to care for Emma. Richard watched in awe. He could have never imagined this quiet, unassuming woman would command such authority. And when the lawyer hesitated, Mariah didn't give him a chance to recover. She pressed on, her voice steady, unyielding. She was fearless. She was brilliant. And most importantly, she was fighting for his family, their family. By the end of the day, the lawyer left, defeated. Richard hugged Mariah, overwhelmed with gratitude. He had known wealth, but he had never known loyalty like this. He realized that family wasn't just blood. Family was people who stood by you when the world threatened to tear you apart. And as he held Emma, cooing softly to calm her after a long day, Richard finally understood that life could be rebuilt. Not the same as before, perhaps, but stronger, more resilient, more human. And it all started with the bravery and love of one black maid who refused to let a family fall apart. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Richard had experienced before. Slowly, deliberately, he began to step out of the shadow of grief and guilt. He found small victories each day, Emma's laughter in the morning, the way she reached for him when she woke, the way her tiny hand wrapped around his finger. These were victories he had never expected to cherish so deeply. Mariah stayed close, always observing, always guiding. She didn't impose herself. She didn't lecture. Instead, she let Richard make mistakes, let him learn the lessons that only experience could teach, and quietly corrected him when necessary. But she had one rule, honesty above all else. Richard could no longer hide behind wealth, excuses, or pride. One evening, as Richard sat in the nursery rocking Emma to sleep, He looked at Mariah and realized how much he had taken her for granted. Her dedication had been unwavering, and yet he had barely noticed her beyond her duties. "Mariah," he said softly, his voice almost trembling, I don't even know how to thank you. You've done more for this family than I could ever imagine. More than I ever did." Mariah smiled faintly, shaking her head. "You don't need to thank me, sir. You need to promise me you'll continue to fight for your family. For Emma, for yourself." "That's the thanks I need." Richard nodded, feeling a mix of humility and determination. He promised himself and her that he would never let fear or grief paralyze him again. He would step into his role as a father, a protector, and a man capable of love and responsibility. The next challenge came unexpectedly. A distant relative of his late wife, someone who had never truly cared for the family, arrived at the mansion with claims about the estate, threatening to take Emma into custody. They assumed Richard was weak, broken, and incapable of standing up for his daughter. But this time he was not alone. Mariah stood beside him, unwavering. "You're making a mistake," Richard said firmly, his voice steady and commanding for the first time in months. "Emma stays here. I am her father, and I will protect her with everything I have. And if anyone tries to take her, they'll have to go through both of us." The relative scoffed, clearly expecting resistance, but Richard's eyes held a new strength. He wasn't the man who had cried endlessly in the nursery just weeks ago. He was someone rebuilt, someone supported by the courage of another. Mariah spoke next, her voice calm but cutting. "You have no claim here. You never cared for this family. You never fought for them. And if you think fear can intimidate us, you're wrong. We fight with truth, with love, and with every ounce of courage we possess. Now leave before you regret it." The relative, taken aback by the sheer force of Mariah's presence and Richard's newfound authority, turned and left defeated. Richard sank into the nearest chair, overwhelmed, his chest heavy with relief. Emma, sensing the tension, reached out to him with a soft babble. He scooped her into his arms, holding her close. For the first time, he truly understood the meaning of protection, of commitment, of family. Mariah watched quietly, her face unreadable for a moment, then broke into a small smile. "See? This family can survive. And more than survive, it can thrive. All it needed was for someone to believe in it, even when it seemed impossible." Richard nodded, tears welling in his eyes, but these were no longer tears of defeat. They were tears of gratitude, of respect, of understanding. He had learned lessons money could never buy, lessons about loyalty, courage, and the true meaning of family. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the mansion transformed. Richard learned to manage his emotions, to care for Emma without fear, to honor his late wife's memory without letting it dominate his life. He became a father who could play, laugh, and comfort. He became a man who could love again, not just others, but himself. And through it all, Mariah remained a constant, quiet force of strength. She never sought recognition, never demanded credit. But Richard knew the truth. Without her, he might never have survived the storm. She had slapped the billionaire's wife. Yes, but more importantly, she had slapped life itself into reality, forcing him to face what mattered before it was too late. One evening, as Emma slept peacefully, Richard looked at Mariah and finally said the words he had long avoided. "Mariah, I don't know how to ever repay you. I owe you everything." Mariah shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, sir. You owe yourself and your family. That's enough. Live your life. Be the father Emma needs, and honor the lessons you've learned. That's repayment enough." Richard nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink deeply into him. He realized that life wasn't about wealth, power, or status. It was about the people who stood by you when the world abandoned you, the ones who had the courage to face what was wrong and make it right. Months passed, and the mansion slowly became a home again. Laughter filled the hallways. Small footsteps echoed through the rooms. And Emma thrived under the care of a father who had finally learned to be present. Richard's heart, once frozen with grief, now beat with love and purpose. And through it all, Mariah remained there, not as a servant, not as an employee, but as a guardian of a family that had nearly fallen apart. She had taught Richard that strength came in many forms, and that courage often came quietly, from those who were never seeking glory. One evening, as the sun set and the mansion was bathed in golden light, Richard held Emma on his hip and looked at Mariah. "I've learned something important," he said softly.
Family. It's not just who you're related to.
It's who stands by you. And you? You are my family. Mariah smiled, a soft, knowing smile. And so are you learning to be yours, sir. And that is all that matters. Richard felt a sense of peace wash over him. The journey had been long, painful, and full of lessons he had never expected to learn. But in the end, it was worth every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of despair, because through it all they had survived, and more than survived. They had grown stronger together, and as he looked down at Emma's smiling face, he whispered a silent promise. He would never allow fear, grief, or cruelty to take away what truly mattered again. He would protect his family. He would honor his responsibilities, and he would never forget the black maid who had awakened him, awakened the family, and reminded him of the power of courage, love, and loyalty. The mansion was no longer just a house. It was a home, a place of laughter, love, and second chances, a place where a family could heal. And at the heart of it, quietly but powerfully, stood Mariah, the woman who had changed everything without ever asking for anything in return. And Richard knew, without a doubt, that the lessons she had taught would stay with him forever.